let's go ahead and get started. We have a still pretty light agenda for this week, so we'll see how much time we spend these various discussion items. Let's start up with the DRAID Meetup. Richard, are you on?
Yeah, I'm here. Can you hear
Cool.
me okay?
Yeah, go ahead.
Awesome, thank you. So there's been a number of us who have been working on DRAID in various forms for the past couple of years, and we're to the point, I think, where we have enough experience with it and are able to identify the remaining gaps to bring it into being a new VDID type for ZFS. But there's still a fair amount of work to be done there. And so I put together a request to put together a workshop for people who are interested in developing or also using DRAID in their environments for ZFS. And Delphix has graciously offered some office space so we can meet. The current meeting date is May 3rd. So that's what, 2 weeks or so? It's the day after DockerCon in San Francisco. So some people who are traveling for that are, could be useful or convenient. And the whole idea is to let's get down, flesh out any remaining design decisions that need to be done, and then identify the work that remains to bring it into the fold and make it happen. So if you're interested, by all means, reach out to myself or anyone in the group. We have a DRAID Slack channel, or locate DRAID, locate us, and RSVP, because we'll need to have a list for people to get into the building. But I appreciate it if everybody can show up that's interested in the project. Cool. And let's get some flesh on the bones.
Cool. And this is in our San Francisco office. So if you've been to any of to last year's OpenZFS Developer Summit, the hackathon was in that location. So that's where it is.
Video will be available.
We have the technology to do that. If up to you, Richard, if you want to, facilitate that. I think it can be difficult to have both in-person and remote folks, but certainly I think we could have, have remote folks at least be able to listen in.
I think it's more effective to have people face-to-face here. And I don't want to exclude people remotely.
Yes, for remote people, live video streaming will be as well.
Yeah, so would the Hangouts be okay, or?
I think the room that we're in, it has to be Zoom, I think. So yeah,
we can lend you a Zoom.
Yeah.
If you guys can do Zoom, then I'm all for it.
Yeah, we can do Zoom. I think, as you mentioned, it can be difficult to coordinate a discussion with both remote and local folks. Yeah. So it might be primarily read-only for remote folks. But we can easily make that available, and the audio in that room I think works pretty well, as long as there's only one discussion going on.
But also will be a better sort of in the same time, because who is live in different time zone, it will be need try to do not sleep.
Yeah, so I think that we'll have. We should be able to record it as well.
Okay, thanks.
Now, Matt, what's a good time to start?
9 is fine with me. I'm in the office usually by 9:15, so 9 o'clock works great for me.
Okay. Current time is fine.
The current time is 11 Pacific time, so it would be 2 hours before this. This is for the DRAID meetup.
Yes, 2 hours before will be fine too.
Okay.
But probably to me,
Cool. Any last thoughts on the DRAID meetup?
Yep, I appreciate all the help, and if by all means, if you have requirements or requests or wish lists, send them in if you can attend.
Yeah, it would be, Richard, it would be great if you could put together like an agenda doc beforehand, and then I think that might be a great way for remote folks to participate as well, like in advance of the meeting, you know, by adding comments or questions to the agenda doc about, you know, design points that they are interested in, and then we can cover it, you know, during the in-person meetup.
also some diagrams, how it works, it will be fine too.
Yeah, and I'll put in links for the previous OpenZFS conference videos.
Yeah.
Okay, put that together. I'll put up a Google Doc for that.
Thanks, Richard.
Sure.
So the next thing that we have on the agenda is a quick update on the ZOL 0.8 status from Brian. Were you able to call in?
Yep, I'm here. Can everybody hear me?
Yep.
Awesome. So yeah, just a quick update for folks. So last week we tagged the final release candidate. There's an 0.80 RC4 that was released. So that's feature complete and has been soaking for about a week now. I've seen a lot of testing before that, obviously, since everything's been available. But this is what we're encouraging people to test as much as possible and kick the tires on. We have a few remaining bugs that we're trying to wrap up in there, but the code shouldn't change appreciably. Beyond that, there's just some documentation updates and some other things, but this is what's expected to be the final release. So we're just working to wrap that up.
That's awesome. And what's your timeline for wrapping that up, assuming that you don't have any other major bug reports?
Assuming nothing new comes in that's major, which we haven't seen yet, hopefully just a couple of weeks, because it has been soaking for quite a long time now. We do have a lot of people who run the master branch and have run previous RCs. So we're just trying to address the last remaining significant issues people have reported.
All right. So like a day, a week, a month?
A couple of weeks. So probably 2 weeks, 3 weeks if we find something, right? But we're trying to wrap it up.
You have to close your bug reports and wait. Release. Sorry for joke, yeah. But it's reality.
Yeah. But yeah, definitely, if people do find things, let us know now so we can get them in.
Yes.
But we don't know anything, you know, too scary yet. So, but definitely let us know. It's looking real solid.
Cool. That's great. Actually, why don't we stick on your other agenda item, just to slightly reordering. I know, Brian, you were asking if there are folks here who have been working on porting ZOL commits to other platforms, if you have any feedback, maybe you can elaborate on what kind of feedback you're looking for.
Yeah, I was just kind of curious what problems people have run into porting features from Linux to the other platforms, or in general, how that process is going. In particular, I'm looking for feedback on things we can be doing better to make that process easier, or better ways to engage with people when we're making design decisions, or things we shouldn't be doing, or problems you found in porting, that kind of thing.
Well, I have a question, Brian.
Yeah.
If you remember, I have pointed to some definition what are redefined on Linux specific from Illuma specific. Probably we have to identify a list of definition and provide it per platform with some redefinition or something else. Also a function naming convention definition with ZFS prefix or something else, because per platform we can redefine some function implementation based on platform specific.
So we've tried to keep as consistent as possible with the Illumos stuff, but since most of us aren't Illumos developers, I'm sure we've diverged in areas. So yeah, I'm all for documenting those places where we've diverged. It'd be nice to have a list of that kind of stuff. I know we've added or extended some interfaces in that way. I think getting all that kind of stuff documented would be great.
Yes, it was some issue in some VFS layer where we are different between Illumos and Linux, and probably try to define some specific of function what we can re-implement per platform will be better. But I have a question, how we can report about this issue, probably for some portability issue or some design issue in coding. How can I report about this issue?
Well, probably the issue tracker is the best spot to start. I mean, we could look at setting up a wiki page or something maybe on the OpenZFS wiki to like document the differences. But an issue is an easy spot to start, just on the ZFS Analytics issue tracker, and then we can figure out where to go from there.
Yes, but if I try to open issue on Linux tracker, it can be not visible to Illumos guys. Probably we can try identify a better place where it will be visible for all.
I'm open to suggestions. Do people think this belongs on the OpenZFS wiki?
I mean, I think it could, although the trick with the wiki is that, you know, it's very easy for that to get out of date or not be maintained. I think it's a lot easier for the folks who are reporting stuff to, like, you know, just shoot out an email or file an issue and with the current state or current issues that they're running into. So, you know, maybe the developer at OpenZFS mailing list might be like an easier form or like good first step for reporting those things.
Brian, this is Peter Jelinek. I've been doing a lot of porting of commits from ZOL over to Illumos, and I do have some notes on some divergence in the SPL interfaces. I can write those up and I guess probably send them out, like Matt was just saying, out to the alias so that everyone can see that.
Yeah. I suppose another option would be we could have a porting document in the source tree or something like that, where we, you know, document the differences and then people could open changes against that. My concern with the mailing list is that we'll just end up with a lot of, you know, emails that won't get collated anywhere.
Yeah, I guess it depends on if we're talking about things that are like differences that need to be documented for posterity versus like, you know, hey, it looks like you guys are using this macro. Could you please use this other function instead or whatever?
Sure.
You know what I mean? Which the letter is more like time and context sensitive and can be resolved, right?
Yeah, I think there's probably two classes of things here. Like one, changes that we can fix, right? We just used the wrong function or macro or whatever. We just need to apply the fix to get in sync. And then probably a whole nother group where we just have to be fundamentally different in this way, right? Just because it's the way the kernel works or whatever, we need to document those differences.
Yeah, it's definitely getting like, Jerry, getting your notes, you know, feel free to just shoot those out on the mailing list, and then maybe when we look at the specifics, we can figure out which of those are things that can be resolved versus things that just need to be documented. I mean, for the things that need to be documented, like I'm fine with doing it on the wiki or in the repo. I mean, the wiki might be like more of the correct place of doing it because it is issues that affect all the platforms. But in the case where there's like, where it's like when you're pulling stuff into Illumos from ZOL, we need to be aware of these differences. Like it might make sense to put those into like a document in the Illumos repo or other documentation, just because like I feel like I am usually looking at the source more than I am at the wiki. So it might be easier for people to find that in the source, since obviously they're already working with the source if they're doing porting.
So it sounds like the place to start is email to the mailing list to start cataloging the differences, and then we can go put them where appropriate.
Cool.
Okay, thanks. And I think we can try to start with the email list, probably try to ask for some proposals. And as a final decision, try to put information to wiki or some shared place. Is it okay?
Yeah, that sounds good to me.
Ask question to mail list first and probably try to find a better place where we can share this info between platforms.
Yep.
Okay. Thank you.
Cool. Any more feedback for Brian on ZOL porting stuff? I saw, Alan, it sounds like you had a kind of relevant announcement. Do you want to do that on audio? Or Josh, or who's on the chat there? Go ahead, Alan.
I don't know if you can hear me very well. I'm at an airport. So yes, Chris Moore and his team have managed to get the testable version of their port of basically reporting ZFS to FreeBSD from the ZOL repo. Basically, instead of trying to catch up commit by commit, they picked a spot, a recent spot in the tree from ZFS and Linux and just got it to work on FreeBSD, which is our master plan for getting it back up in sync with Linux so that we can just march forward off that repo like we had been doing with the Lumos. And we have test images for download now where we basically have ZFS as a third-party package, kind of like it is on Linux. We'll probably integrate it back into the base system, but for now it's easier to test as an external package.
Cool. It might be helpful to update other folks in the broader OpenZFS community by just sending like a link or a copy of the email that you have there to the FreeBSD list. Cross-post that over to the developer at OpenZFS list. Just to
that's a good idea.
Where, folks on Lumos and Linux that aren't necessarily on this call. Cool. Well, it's good to hear that that direction is making progress.
Yeah, because that will get us caught up on the missing feature flags and also mean that we get the native encryption and all the other stuff. And most importantly, just all the little fixes and stuff that have happened over the years that didn't get ported over.
Yeah, that's very cool.
Just curious, but what happens to the trim support?
So I can shed a little light on that. So trim support was added to the Linux tree. It's a slightly different implementation, but there is trim support in ZFS now on the Linux side.
Okay, so Alan, from the FreeBSD side, the trim implementation just changed.
If you're using the version that's available as packages, then currently, yes, it switches to the I think it's originally from Nexenta version of trim that has the smarter queuing.
Does that actually work, or does it require more hookups still?
I don't actually know.
So I can comment.
The work with current call for testing was based on previous snapshots. It was not updated.
So what's up at call for testing was based on December 15th ZFS on Linux. It's kind of a pain to rebase, and so I'm going to rebase closer to when I plan to post the PR now. I'm waiting for 0.8 to get cut, and then Delphix has a whole bunch of changes that are in the pipe to go into master as soon as 0.8 is cut. And so my plan is to rebase to master as soon as the Delphix changes have gone in, because I'd like to have a little bit of a quiescent period in master, and but it's not really fair to have any reasonably tested changes waiting on the FreeBSD support discussion. So I think that I think 4 to 6 weeks is kind of when but the fact of the matter is what's in there, the short thing is what the port now doesn't have the dead list based term support, but it will soon. And I mean, as soon as I rebase it, in hopes of getting the PR going.
Cool. Thanks for the update. Anything else on that topic? All right, we'll move on then. The next thing on the agenda was a proposal to enable compression by default. Kosh had asked about this. I don't know if you're on the call, Kosh. But we'll go ahead and I'll go ahead and bring it up. So there's a linked issue in the ZOL issue tracker. I guess I'll summarize since I guess Kosh isn't here to do that. The proposal is that by default, when you create a new pool, it would come with compression on instead of off. So it'd be using LZ4. I guess the advantage of doing this is that like a lot of people, the vast majority of workloads do benefit from having compression on, and so it gives a better out-of-the-box experience for a lot of folks, especially those who are not, not expert users. I think that, in my opinion, the downside is that at least the current implementation, even with LZ4, does have some CPU costs, and maybe a more minor concern is that it does change the space usage in a way that might be surprising, and it can introduce running out of space in ways that you didn't otherwise expect. Let's say you create a giant Oracle database file and that writes out the whole file. It touches every block of it. Now it's consuming that space, and then but if it were compressed, it would compress down. Each block would compress down really small. But if you were relying on the fact that okay, well, I initialize this Oracle file, now I'll always be able to write to it. The space is effectively been reserved. Then that kind of idea would no longer work. So I think there's definitely some interesting trade-offs here, and I guess I'll open the discussion for other folks' thoughts on it.
I have some comments.
Mm-hmm.
For example, old Spark machine do not support compression enabled on pool from Open Boot program for boot system. But we can enable compression on dataset. What we are using with DLOS on Spark and Intel, we are using do not enable compression on airpool and enable compression under a special dataset. For example, where we host the primary files and something else.
So
I think do not enable compression by default.
So Igor, are you all the metadata is compressed by default? So was that changed, or are you talking about the difference between LZ4 and LZJB?
I'm talking about compression as is. LZ4 and gzip not different on Spark. But on primary RPool, you cannot enable compression on pool itself, but you can use compression on dataset where we host a boot environment.
So there's some data set that you can't enable compression on, presumably because of the bootloader issue.
Yes, and because Open Boot on Spark machine do not enable compression on RPool, where you have to read boot information.
So
All
that
right.
gets back to the issue we've discussed several times about portable and defaults and how boot pools need to be different, period, because it's going to be dependent on whatever method the machine boots. And so making something default for data pools is one thing, but whatever you're going to use to create a boot pool or a pool that you're going to boot from is going to have to be, always going to have to be system dependent.
Right. I think this is not substantially different to the situation with Grub and or the FreeBSD loader and different feature support, or the fact that, you know, if you're creating a boot pool on an EFI system, you end up needing to create a whole bunch of fancy partitions and stuff for that. So
I think you could argue, like, you know, if you're creating a boot pool, you really have to know what you're doing, and therefore, like, whatever we do with compression, you know, you can learn to set zpool to do zpool create -o compression equals off if you need to or whatever.
Yep.
And you know, really, the question kind of boils down to, for like people that are, because those pools, people aren't typing zpool create at the command line to create their boot pools. Generally speaking, they're getting it like, you know, installed from some bootloader, or they're like following some crazy script recipe on the web with like 1,000 instructions. And adding one more is no big deal. So really, it's like people that are doing zpool create with no arguments to create their data pool, you know, should it be compressed or not?
For what it's worth, FreeNAS compression on by default for pools in the 2013 timeframe, and the benefits, I don't want to give bogus percentages, but the benefits outweigh the drawbacks in almost every case. So.
That's a good data.
Yeah, like I think we came to the same conclusion about being able to get rid of turning off compressed art as a feature, because again, the compression was helpful in the very large majority of cases.
I mean, even if even if you have uncompressible data, turning compression on oftentimes will save you space just because it can crunch up the end of blocks. The vast majority of systems have way more CPU than they have disk. So a lot of times you're getting a performance benefit.
and I think if you were in a system where that was not true,
benefit.
I think if you were in a system where that was not true, like if you were in a CPU constrained system, you're already going to have to make a bunch of other choices anyway. So,
right.
Yeah.
The one drawback that's pretty consistent with turning compression on is it does oftentimes impact write speed. You know, a lot of times you will take a write speed drop simply because the system will, you know, writing is the most taxing thing to begin with. And if you have a CPU issue at all, turning on compression its first exposure will be your write speed drops. But the vast majority of people don't care about that. You know, they go, look, my increased by 50% and my write speed dropped by 10, I'll take it every day of the week.
Most non-embedded systems don't have the CPU, honestly. Most of them are more concerned about physical memory.
Yeah, those are all good points. I guess my question would be, let's say for the scenarios where it is a detriment, like let's say you're ingesting a lot of video, your workload is like ingesting a lot of video files, and they're already compressed. Compression doesn't help, it doesn't save any space, it adds more CPU, and you are like, you know, running low on CPU because you're doing, you know, RAID Z3 calculations and whatever other stuff. For those folks, like, are we okay with, you know, in the next release, or, you know, 2 releases now or whatever, telling them, you know, yeah, it's going to get slower for you. You need to, now you're going to have to do, you know, zpool create -o compression equals off.
Well,
they can,
maybe that's
compression can be changed at runtime.
Pardon?
You don't have to. Compression can be changed at runtime, so it's not like
the pressure short circuits. Yeah, I guess my answer to compression. My answer to that would be compression short circuits. And so if you're actually writing incompressible data, there isn't a huge CPU overhead to that. Because, you know, it looks at the first part of the block and goes, oh, I can't compress that, and gives up on it. You know, when compression actually has noticeable CPU overhead is when it can compress.
Well, I'd also like to observe, it sounds like the people who will suffer from the changed defaults are also going to be the more sophisticated users, or am I not understanding correctly? I mean, are likely to be more sophisticated users.
I think it's the way around, but I also think that the people who are using ZFS-based systems for video editing, they're not the ones who are doing the zpool create or ZFS create commands themselves. They're going through some UI. And so I think it's up to their administrators or to the system integrators who are creating whatever embedded systems to be able to at least say, this data set has compression on, the compression is not working well, you might get better performance by turning it off.
I mean, I'll admit, in FreeNAS, we turned it off in 2013, or turned it on by default in 2013. I got more pushback from dropping 100 megabit Ethernet drivers from FreeNAS than I did from enabling compression by default. I mean, for the vast majority of people, just, oh, thanks. Yeah. This was really a non-issue in FreeNAS anyways. And FreeNAS is used in everything from video editing to security camera streaming to data, I mean, you name it, people are using it there. So in my opinion, this is a no-brainer, turn it on by default.
And the degraded case is not so bad because as soon as you ZFS set compress equals off, you get all new writes don't get compressed. And you know, the decompress isn't what's slowing anything down.
Right.
So it's not like some other features where you have to do a bunch of work to try to make it stop doing whatever it was doing.
Yes, undoing dedupe is a far different beast than undoing compression.
Yeah. Well, in the decompression, generally, you don't need to undo. If you're worried about the write speed, you just turn it off and your new writes don't suffer.
That's right.
Well, I think these are definitely a lot of good points. And it sounds like
there's
consensus.
One other point, if compress is off, you don't benefit from the whole detection stuff, right? Like it doesn't write a string of all zeros compressed.
Yeah. It sounds like, you know, I heard a lot of opinions in favor of this change, and none, perhaps, or only from myself against it. So, you know, it sounds like this is something we should move forward with. Is somebody interested in kind of taking this as an action item to, I guess, both like create the pull requests, but also figure out like what the rollout looks like, you know, what the timeline looks like, what the notification looks like. You know, do we do this in this release or the next release, or, you know, how long of a notice period do we have? And answering those kinds of questions, I think, are still up in the air. But I think, you know, probably somebody should just come up with a proposal, and then we'll have some minor tweaks from there. And maybe do some tests to show what the performance impact is in the worst cases.
I think use cases will be fine if we can discuss it on wiki, where benefit from compressed or uncompressed zpool in variation time.
Just as one kind of data point, we at IX Systems doing a lot of benchmarks, and usually we are testing with uncompressible data with compression enabled. And I can say that compression, at least LZ4, is not the worst in our profiles. The FS has so many other CPU consuming points that compression is not as terrible.
Cool.
And even there still remain some memory copies that often takes significant parts of time comparing to compression otherwise. I wouldn't say that there are significant downsides of enable compression. Of course, there are some customers, as was mentioned, that are working with video files and so on, where it just makes no any sense to compress, but those can disable it explicitly when needed, and that's what they are doing. But that's not exactly dramatic, in my opinion.
And that
could you
depend a bit. In the case of working with uncompressed video, when they're editing the raw video before they've rendered it, that actually does compress because it's uncompressed video.
Usually video is kind of compressed, but otherwise bit stream of uncompressed could be quite high. But yeah, it depends on codec. But I'm just saying that as Josh told, that we're using it in FreeNAS enabled by default since long time, and very few people complain that it's hurts them somehow.
Cool. So I didn't hear any volunteers. Why don't we put this in the notes, and I'll include kind of a call for somebody to take ownership of this in the meeting notes that we send out. Cool. Next, so only a couple more agenda items. The next meeting is scheduled currently for May 21st. I'd like to push it back by 1 week because I'm going to be out that week of the 21st. So the next meeting, we'll have it on the 28th at the later time in the day.
Is that 1 p.m. again?
Yeah.
Seems very reasonable.
Yeah, and it's the day after Memorial Day, just FYI.
Yes.
Okay.
After Memorial Day, yep.
That's one of those holidays, I guess.
Yes.
Very well.
Yes, if you're in the United States, you probably have that Monday off. Cool. So the last item that I had was the code of conduct. Folks probably saw either the email or the pull requests or the Slack message about the code of conduct that we're working on. Just wanted to give folks an additional opportunity to give us any feedback on this call. If anybody has it, also feel free to email either publicly on the list or email me or Karen or Brian privately if you want to as well.
I think it's a good idea.
Thanks, Josh.
I also think it's a good idea, but thankfully the OpenZFS project doesn't need it right now, and let's keep it that way.
Well, we're also open to, and we have received some feedback so far that from folks who supported the proposal in general, but had either small specific concerns or just suggestions of how to reword things. So if you have that kind of feedback as well, we'd like to hear it. Feel free to email us or let us know now. All right. If not, that was the last thing that I had on the agenda for this week. Any more or additional agenda items? If not, then we'll see you in 5 weeks from today.
Sorry, I was going to ask if anybody else had feedback about my the idea of updating the version of LZ4 that we're using to get faster compression and decompression, but that it will mean that the checksum of compressing the same data might not be the same anymore.
Yeah, were you able to investigate if the how much performance benefit we could get by updating only the decompressor and not the compression algorithm / on disk format?
Not yet, but that's part of the plan.
Well,
I was wondering if anybody else had any.
I mean, in general, I think it's a great idea. For those specific cases of like the not right, which is one that we do care about at Delphix, it would be nice to have like a switch to be able to use the old compression algorithm when needed. But that could just be like a tunable or something like that.
Does the NUP write end up mattering that much? Because if you overwrite with the same data the first time, the NUP write won't work and it'll update to the new checksum. But then when you compress that data the third time, it will match.
Yeah, I mean,
so the cost is only one extra write. But yeah, I think having the switch to go back is obviously useful.
Yeah, I mean, the issue is that if you're actually relying on this, it means that you could roughly double the storage requirements, and saying like, oh, great, like in the next, release of our software, maybe you might, it might end up using twice your storage is not a great story.
Right. I didn't think about snapshots and clones and how that would affect it.
You have all these snapshots, and so you'd end up storing both versions of it, right? The original version in the snapshots, and then the new version in the newer snapshots. That's really the issue. It's the space savings, not the CPU and I/O savings, that are really the most important to us.
If only we could rewrite the block pointers somehow.
Only. That's like there's like somebody's law on the internet that like every discussion eventually ends up referencing Hitler or something. That's like our of it. Like every discussion eventually ends up referencing block pointer rewrite.
Godwin's law.
Godwin's law, right?
A corollary.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And any other feedback for for Alan on updating LZ4? I suspect if you do it if you do the work, everybody's gonna like it.
Yeah.
I have only one question: how it's stable and.
Sorry, Iger, I think maybe you cut out. You were asking about stability of what in particular?
Yes, I asked about stability of new code of LZ4 compression.
Right, like is it buggy essentially?
Yeah.
Not that anyone is aware of. Maybe we would maybe not take the one we can go one version older or something, but there are no known issues that I'm aware of. Just that the most recent release increases decompression performance on most workloads by about 20% on AMD 64 hardware.
Cool. Yeah,
okay, one question. If I have 1 petabyte of data with all the LZ4, can new LZ4 corrupt my data?
No.
Yeah. But I think maybe a good way to answer that question might be to talk about like the soak time of the algorithm in other use cases, right? Like if we're updating not necessarily to the bleeding edge, but to something that is already in use by other, substantial use cases outside of ZFS, then I think that would probably help people to feel good about the quality of that code. Since there's probably not many folks who are really in a position to actually review like the core algorithm. And maybe another way to answer that concern would be with like testing, especially with tests that cover like compressing stuff with the old algorithm, then decompressing it with the new algorithm and stuff like that.
Yes, I mean testing about to try to compress data by all the LZ4 compression and try to read this data with new LZ4 compression to be sure we have no degradation. It was my question.
Yeah, that was definitely, as Matt said, the first plan would be just to get the decompression performance improvements so that we don't change the on-disk version at all, and then evaluate whether it's worth doing the compression enhancements as well, and probably having a switch to be able to switch back to the old one, possibly off by default at first so that we can test with it.
Also, additional question, if we have updated LZ4 and we have a very large all the data, have you tested big data with decompression. For example, you have several terabytes of all the data with LZ4 compression and try to decompress it and take a look. You have no something broken for reading. Also, if you can use a different block size of the data.
You can definitely use the different block sizes, but yes, it'll be interesting to see what the performance difference is with the new code decompressing data that was compressed with the old algorithm.
Yes, but I'm interested in how it's stable. Performance is fine, but it should be stable first.
Find it as a checksum error if it decompresses incorrectly, so we would know right away.
Okay, thanks.
Maybe
is that true?
Actually,
that we do the checksum after.
Yes, my bad.
So maybe we could just add Z4V2 as a different compression method at first, and then switch the decompressor over. And then I don't know that you'd really even need to switch the compressor over. People could make that switch manually. And that way systems could still read and write using both algorithms if they needed to. Be lower risk at any rate.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that the risk, I mean, but let's see, I feel like the risk is probably pretty low already. But I think that's definitely a good option to keep available if we think we need to go that way.
And that actually reminds me of the other issue I was going to ask about. So for some settings like compress and checksum, we have a value of on that's a default. But over time, that default has changed, right? Compress equals on moved from LZJB to LZ4, and checksum on moved from Fletcher 2 to Fletcher 4.
Yep.
There's not a good way for the user to tell which one is using when it's set to on. Like if you do ZFS get compress, it just says on. It doesn't actually tell you what one it's using.
I think true. Yeah, it would be nice if it told you like on, and then like in parentheses LZ4 or whatever.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't have a good answer for that. I think we probably need to do a little bit of development effort to do that.
Yeah, because you don't want to mess up, being able to deal with a script being able to read the value and so on by tacking on, contextual information like that onto the value of.
You could add another, like a read-only derived property that just reports what's actually in use.
Yeah, I mean, it should be like a pool property that's read-only. That's like, default compression is
equals LZ4.
LZ4 or whatever. That just tells you what the on value means.
We could presumably do the same for checksums at the same time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That seems reasonable.
Cool. All right. Well, we're on time with our meeting, which is great. And I will thank you all for participating. I'll see you in 5 weeks.
Thanks, Matt.
Thank you. Bye.
Thanks, everybody.
Ciao.